Well, good evening and welcome to Dome at Home for Thursday, December the 16th, 2021. I'm Scott Young, your host, planetarium astronomer at the Manitoba Museum, and it's great to be back for another weekly episode of Dome at Home. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all checking in the chat. Always great to say hi to everyone. I started off trying to keep up saying hi to everyone individually, and then I was typing so fast, I think I spelled Janet's name completely backwards, and it just sort of went downhill from there. So hello, everyone. It's great to see so many folks joining us in the chats. We have a good show for you tonight, I think. We're in the depths of winter. It certainly feels like it today. I was out a couple of times today, and man, that wind was pretty bad. Today, Winterpeg gets earns its reputation for sure. We were Winterpeg earlier in the week, winning the Grey Cup, if you're a football fan. Now we're Winterpeg. Soon we'll be back to just regular Winnipeg. Anyway, that's where we're broadcasting one from here in Treaty 1 territory. And we will be taking a look at a couple of different things going on today. First of all, we'll be looking at the winter solstice and sort of the winter constellations. We have the long, dark nights of winter. You can pretty much see 3 whole seasons worth of constellations because the night is so long that we're not limited to just one part of the sky. We actually get to see a whole bunch of it. So we'll look at some of that. We're also going to be previewing a little bit of the James Webb Space Telescope launch. Now that was recently bumped. It was originally supposed to be the 18th, so this would have been sort of the show to feature it. Then it was bumped to the 22nd because as they were setting it all up, there was a little bit of not really an accident, but one of the clamps loosened quickly and the whole thing sort of shook a little bit, and they wanted to make sure that there were no wires shook loose or anything like that. So they gave it a once over, gave it a clean bill of health. They took it up to the rocket. It's up on top of the rocket now, and when they connect it to the rocket, they have to deal with the communications between the rocket and the spacecraft, and there was a little bit of a glitch. So they delayed it again. So right now we don't have a firm launch date, but it's no earlier than December 24th. So we'll have one whole show again before then. Now, as you know, Dome at Home will be covering the launch live. We'll be here starting at probably about 5:20 a.m. Once we get a new launch time, we'll update our Facebook event. But we'll be covering that, and we'll be talking particularly about the Canadian contributions to the James Webb Space Telescope, which is, of course, the successor to the famous Hubble Space Telescope. Bigger, better, and more Canadian. So that'll be later on in the show. Let's see. We're going to zap right into a couple of things here. First of all, the Planetarium, Science Gallery, and Museum are open. We still have limited hours, but there's all sorts of fun things going on for the winter break. Pajama days, when it's holidays. I mean, I've been in my pajamas working at home for a year now, I guess. But it's nice to be able to go out to places in your pajamas. And so we've got pajama days coming up. You can get into all the different areas. There's a brand new planetarium show opening that actually we'll have our good friend Mike on next week to talk about. And as well as our regular planetarium shows, scavenger hunts, all sorts of winter fun, science demonstrations involving static electricity and cold, really fun stuff. So that's all coming up for the winter break. And we're looking forward to being able to have people at the museum, see the new gallery, down in the science gallery, down in the planetarium. So that's coming up just a little while there. Oops, we'll come back here. So let's get right into the sky. We've got a lot of things to cover today. And so if we hop over to the sky, sun sets really early. I think sun sets, 4:30, something ridiculous like that, really, really early. And so as soon as it starts getting dark, we've still got those great planets in the evening sky. Venus popping out very, very early. And as the night goes on, we actually find that there are 3 planets all lined up in the sky there. We've got Venus down at the bottom, Jupiter up at the top, and in between, fainter, is Saturn. And so that is the lineup for the evening sky. A little while ago, the moon tracked through there last week, and that was a nice set of photo ops. As we move around the sky, we'll start to see a few other things. And we will go over a few more of the constellations, but let's... there we go. Way over in the west, we still have summer stars. It is middle of December. It is minus 36 with the wind chill. And there we have the summer triangle, still well above the horizon, nicely placed. I mean, it's totally misnamed, but we can still see those summer stars. And I like to look at those in the winter sometimes, just because when it is summer, I can think back to, oh yeah, I was looking at the Ring Nebula in Lyra in, minus 35 degrees. And doesn't this feel much better? That's how I help myself cope with the summertime mosquitoes and heat and all that kind of stuff. Boy, I complain a lot. Anyway, summer triangle still up in the sky. The fall constellations are still in the early evening in the southern part of the sky. Now, as the sky moves across, as the night gets later, those constellations will move sort of where they belong. Normally, the last season's constellations are usually over in the west, and this season's constellations are up in the south, and the next season's constellations are usually just before sunrise. But because we've got this really, really long night, we get to see those other seasons quite a bit better. So we've got summer, we've got fall with the square of Pegasus here, with Andromeda, and the Andromeda galaxy. It's right in about here. We've talked about Andromeda before. There's Cassiopeia, the W, very high overhead. And then over in the eastern sky, well, there's the moon, first of all. We're coming up to full moon in just a few days. But right now, the moon is over in the winter constellations. We've got Taurus, the bull, with the Pleiades star cluster. We've got the bright star Capella in Auriga. And then as the night goes on, more constellations rise in the east. So I've just sort of jumped forward to about 10 o'clock now. We're actually seeing the winter constellations rising. Orion, the hunter with his belt. Gemini, the twins. We were focusing on Gemini last week for the Geminid meteor shower. I didn't see a single Geminid meteor. It was totally cloudy the night of our event. I did watch some online sites. There was a great one in Cincinnati. There was one in actually off in Abu Dhabi that I caught part of. But it was totally overcast. And as Jenny points out, yeah, right now the moon is barely aglow behind the overcast. On the night of the Geminids, I couldn't even see the moon through the clouds. You couldn't even tell where it was. That's how thick the clouds were. So, unfortunately, the Geminids were a bit of a bust this year. But maybe next year. And we've got the quadrantid meteors coming up in January. That's another one we'll try for. Now, so here we are in winter. And it's, let's get to around midnight or so. Here we are just before midnight. And in the east, rising in the east, are what we would consider springtime constellations. Basically, Gemini, that's a winter constellation. The next zodiac constellation over, Cancer the crab, kind of a springtime constellation. And then Leo the lion, for sure, a springtime constellation. Spring is coming. And we know that because we know the stars, and we know the cycles, and we know how things change. And I mean, we consider ourselves fairly modern, fairly, scientifically literate, and we understand the universe a little bit. Well, people several thousand years ago thought the same thing. They understood the cycles of the stars, the motions of the sun and the moon. They didn't know why it all happened. They didn't know about gravity. They didn't know about relativity. They didn't know any of that stuff. But they did know the cycles that were happening. And so the solstice, which is coming up, was one of those real turning points in the calendar, because essentially the solstice was the point where either you would be able to do something to help the universe sort of move away from darkness, or you would fail and the universe would slip into perpetual darkness forever. So it was like a life and death kind of existential battle that would go on around the solstice time. And so we're going to take a look a little bit at the things that that happen around the solstice. Let me just get our star program set up here for our look at the solstice. So officially the solstice will occur on the 21st of December at 9:58 a.m. Central Standard Time. It's an instant. It's not even a whole day or a period of time. It's an instant in time that we can calculate to the second if we really wanted to. I just didn't bother memorizing how many seconds after 9:58 a.m. it was, because it doesn't really matter that much. But it is an instantaneous point in time, and it's something that we can measure and predict in advance very precisely. So that's, I guess, one useful thing. If we look at the sky around solstice time, we wind up seeing kind of what happens. Here, we're going to zoom out here, give ourselves a nice wide field of view. Let's see. So here we're going to show, basically I'm showing half of the entire sky at once. So you've got the curved horizon here. West is over right on the edge here, and east is right on the edge over there. And so when the sun rises in December, it doesn't rise in the east. It doesn't set in the west. It rises kind of in the southeast, and it does not get very high up in the sky in the south before it starts sinking down again and disappears after only a few hours. It's only up in the sky for us here at the latitude of Winnipeg around 8 hours out of 24. That is why it's cold here, because the sun is not shining on us for very long, and it's shining on us at a very low angle. I mean, if the sun only gets this high, it's really not being very efficient. Its heat is sort of hitting the earth at an angle where we are. It's spread out, and it's really not heating up the earth. So those two factors, basically, that's why it's colder here. Now, we'll just stay here for a bit. If we jump forward 3 months, here's the sky in March. Now, in March, the sun rises pretty much due east, off in the left there, goes kind of halfway up the sky maybe, before setting down in the west, and we've got about 12 hours of sun. So in springtime, it's warmer because we've got more sunlight, more hours of sun, and the sun is shining on us more directly. Fast forward another 3 months, you got the summer solstice in June. The sun rises very far north of east. In fact, I can't even fit it on my screen. It's so far north of east. It rises early in the morning, spends a lot of time high up in the sky. The sun is beating down on us. It heats up the earth very effectively, and we convert over into summer. Now, of course, the weather doesn't change on an instant like that. It takes a while for the earth to heat up. There are other things that are involved. There's winds and lakes and mountains and jet streams and all that other kind of stuff. But there is, the general pattern is really marked by these positions of the sun. And you don't need any equipment to track this. You just watch where the sun is rising. And the sun will rise at a different point each morning, until it slows down and then stops, and then it'll move back and go the other way, and then it'll slow down and then it'll stop. There'll be this range that the sun will rise in every year, and that cycle repeats itself. So with only your eyes, basically, and maybe a stick or some rocks or something to pile up to mark these directions, you could figure out these cycles of the seasons. And so, I mean, now we know more about what's going on. We know that this is caused by the tilt of the Earth around the sun. So here's the view right now. There's the Earth. Yes, it's round. We're not going to get into that. And basically, you can see that the northern part of the Earth, not as much of it is lit up by the sun. The sun is actually sort of down off in that direction, based on where the daytime and the nighttime side is. So the orbit of the sun, with the apparent orbit of the sun, the orbit of the Earth, is tilted relative to our north and south axis. And 6 months from now, it's kind of the opposite situation. More of the northern hemisphere is lit up during the daytime, and so we have a longer day, more heat, more direct heat, and that gives us our temperature. Has nothing at all to do with the distance from the sun. It is true that the Earth gets slightly closer and slightly farther from the sun as it orbits, but the date that we're closest to the sun, January 4th. If you live in Winnipeg, you know that January 4th is not the warmest day of the year. And actually, I just see a point here. Ulrich has just pointed out if the sun is at a very low angle, it has to go through more atmosphere, which absorbs some of the heat and the rays of the sun as well. That's true. You know, when you're watching the sun rise and it's sort of all red, a lot of the other colors of the sunlight, the orange and yellow and green and blue and violet, all that stuff has been scattered away or absorbed by the atmosphere. Only the red light gets through. Well, only the red light getting through means not as much heat is getting through. So that makes it sort of an even worse situation. So what's really happening is the orbit of the Earth around the sun is tilted compared to the Earth. Now, usually they show the picture like this because, you know, the orbit of the Earth is sort of the bigger reference point. But I actually find it a little bit more easier to think of this way because we live on the Earth. So let's use that as our reference point. North Pole is up, South Pole is down. In June, the sun is shining down on the North Hemisphere and giving it lots of light. We have summer. In December, it's the opposite. It's sort of shining more on the Southern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere has summer. The Northern Hemisphere has winter. Most of you will have seen various explanations of this kind of thing. It's taught in, you know, I think grade 6 for sure in science. But often people will talk about, you know, the date of the solstice or the event or things like that, and not really connect it. It's a specific spot in the Earth's orbit. On exactly that moment, the Earth is reaching the point in its orbit where our North Pole is pointed as far away from the sun as possible, like the absolute maximum. And yes, that has an instantaneous duration, but I mean a day or two on either side, it'll be almost the same. A lot of festivals happen at this time of the year. Jenny was saying about the various solstice festivals, and I mean Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. There are many of these festivals all have to do with light. I'm Scandinavian in background on one side, and one of the things that they do there, the Yule log, they light big bonfires, particularly on hills. And the idea is the sun is so low in the sky when you're trying to we're trying to sort of help the sun and heat it up, because we want to make sure that the sun actually doesn't keep getting lower and lower in the sky and disappear forever. I mean, that, you know, the folks in Scandinavia are already sort of pushing the temperature and things like that. So you don't want to get too cold. And as the sun gets lower and lower, they light these bonfires. There's various festivals and feasts and all sorts of stuff that happens. And lo and behold, it works, because every year the sun stops and then gets higher and higher and higher. Now, cause and effect. Okay, I seriously doubt that the fires that we're lighting are actually heating up the sun. We know the sun is, you know, 6,000 degrees and it's 150 million kilometers away. So, I mean, my little bonfire is not doing nothing. But it's easy to understand why these festivals came about and why they still became popular, because they do seem to work. And even if now we know intellectually they don't work, there's still something about celebrating that idea of the cycles of the planets and so on that appeals to us. So whatever solstice festival you choose to celebrate, happy solstice festival. And next week we'll be looking back on the year, as people often do at this time of the year, and look at some of our favorite events. We'll talk to some guests, and we'll have a little bit of a holiday party. So that'll be on the docket for next week. Okay, I'm just going to check our chat here. I saw lots of stuff going by. Oh, lots of folks checking in. Great. Oh, Stephen, and nice to see you. Rick from Fort Richmond. Excellent. Linda and Kathy. And Daniel from Calgary. Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. And Hollis is here from Connecticut. Nice to see you again. And Chaos, you are here as well. I think I saw a question from you that came by. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Do I believe in Planet 9? Well, I think there's two answers to that. I think Planet 9 refers to like a specific theory of a specific planet and things like that. I don't believe in that. I think that there are probably other planets out there that we haven't found. Probably they're going to be small dwarf planets, though, like Pluto, like Sedna and Eris, and those small kinds of things. We're going to find buckets of those. I'm pretty sure that we aren't going to find a large planet, like, say, the size of the Earth or bigger, anywhere in the plane of the solar system. And I say that because we've looked. We've looked everywhere in there. We would have seen something unless it's in a totally unusual orbit. And that's a possibility, but I think it's getting to be a small possibility. We know that area of the sky pretty well. Now, maybe it goes around up and down, or at a weird angle, or maybe it's very oval shaped, so it's very far away sometimes, and then it only comes close. Those are possibilities, but those things we don't tend to see those when we look at our solar system or when we look at other solar systems. And when we run the math, the simulations of how we think planets form, it's hard to have those happen and have them stick around for any length of time. When you have planets that sort of cross other planets' orbits or go in these weird configurations, they tend to eject each other from the system and disappear, not stick around very long. Our solar system's been here 4.5 billion years. So I think that if there was anything in a weird orbit like that, it probably would have already been ejected or disturbed or perhaps captured into a more circular orbit. Maybe that's where we got some of our existing planets. So I'm not sure about Planet 9. We'll have to see if there will be new discoveries. I love being wrong about this stuff, though, because that's the great thing. We really have no idea what possibilities are out there, and that's part of the magic, right? I see Tiffany and Jenny were talking about the different constellations and what people would name them if they named them now. So Tiffany's saying the stethoscope and the Zumba dancer, and Starbucks Grande. Yes, I'm sure that there would be a Starbucks constellation. In fact, I'm sure that it would all be corporate, and you would have Pepsi and Coke, and yeah. Anyway, I'll keep the ancient ones. They seem a little bit more innocent. Okay, let's see. One of the things that comes up around solstice time, and someone always figures this out, they look in the newspaper or online and they find the rising and setting times, and they say, well, why isn't the latest sunrise on the solstice? It's usually off by a couple of days. And why isn't the longest number of daylight or the shortest number of daylight hours right on the solstice? It has to do with a couple of things, but the main thing is that the sun is actually, it looks about this big in the sky. So when do you call sunrise? Is it when the center of the sun has crossed the horizon? Or is it when the top of the sun has crossed the horizon? Or the bottom of the sun? Like, where do you define it? The calculations use the center of the sun, but most of us would say, as soon as I can see the sun above the horizon, that's sunrise. So that's one of the reasons that you get that kind of difference there. Let's see. Some more stuff on Planet 9 from Chaos. Well, yeah, it could be exceptionally distant. But like I say, we'll have to see. We've been because we've been looking for asteroids around the Earth and around the sun. We've been looking for stuff, and we can see things down to a pretty small size. So if there is a planet like that, it should be discovered in the next probably decade, perhaps, I would say. If we don't find it in the next decade, it's probably not out there. So we'll have to see what is going to happen there. Okay, we'll come back to some more questions in a moment, but right now it is time for
Cool Space Stuff!
Okay, so there are two segments to our cool space stuff today. One of them has to do with something I said we didn't need to worry about anymore. Comet Leonard. Remember Comet Leonard? We talked about it last week. It was bright in the sky, relatively speaking. You could see it in binoculars, and it was moving very quickly over by the constellation of Boötes, and it was heading straight down towards the horizon in the morning sky, and you could see it before dawn. I never got a chance to see it at all for a combination of clouds and sleeping through my alarm. So I missed out on it. and it swung around the sun. It's now in the evening sky, but it's very, very low, and I didn't think we'd be able to see it here. Well, maybe I was wrong. It has brightened substantially, and so if you go out right after sunset, you might actually be able to catch it over the next 2 or 3 nights. Now, of course, the next 2 or 3 nights are also forecast to be cloudy here in Winnipeg. But if you have clear skies, or if you live farther south, like Hollis in Connecticut, you're probably far enough south that it'll be easier for you to see, because basically the angles that it's at, for us here, it's right along the horizon. But for you, it'd be up a little bit, and so you might be able to catch it. And if you happen to be, joining us from Texas or Bolivia or something like that, you'll have a much better time. Here's where it was tonight at 5:20. We've got our evening planets. So we've got Jupiter up there at the top. We've got Saturn in the middle. We've got Venus. And right there is where Comet Leonard was a couple of hours ago. And it actually is perhaps bright enough to see, even though the sky is bright twilight. Tomorrow night, it's actually moving along the horizon, almost parallel to the horizon. And so it'll be underneath Venus tomorrow. And then the next night, it'll be underneath Venus and a little bit to the left. And then after that, it starts to sort of go down low and probably disappear. And it's probably fading at that point. Its closest point to the sun was to the Earth was December 12th. And so that was probably close to its brightest. I'm not sure if you would see it with your unaided eyes or if you'd need a pair of binoculars. Certainly, you needed a pair of binoculars when it was in the morning sky. I suspect you'd probably at least need binoculars as well now, because even though it's brighter, it's lower down in the twilight sky. So the sky background is brighter, and the binoculars would really help pull it in. Let's see. So you might try for Comet Leonard. I'm going to give it a try if we get any evening clear skies. Oh, that's PM. I forgot to change the time on a couple of the things there. So this is all in the evening, so right after sunset. I think that the forecast doesn't look great, but you never know. So that's one of the things that we'll be doing. Now coming up, we have one more thing, the James Webb Space Telescope launch. They started working on this thing in 1990, the year that the Hubble Space Telescope was launched, because then, the telescope was operating in space. They had the initial problems with it that were fixed by a space shuttle crew that went and fixed everything up. And then Hubble became the most successful scientific instrument ever. But even then, they knew that it could only last for so long. Satellites can only be visited so many times. We don't even have the space shuttle anymore. So the Hubble will never get fixed. Eventually, they're going to have to just push it into the ocean and let it burn up, because it will stop working. And it's already been losing some problems, losing the ability to point accurately and things like that. There have been a number of shutdown and so on. So right after Hubble was launched, they started working on the next generation space telescope, it was called. And this would be a much bigger telescope to deal with even more kinds of discovery and to see even farther. Well, it's finally going into space. It's built, it's put together, it's sitting on top of a rocket down in French Guiana in South America, and it is scheduled to launch the morning of Christmas Eve. No earlier than the morning of Christmas Eve. Here it is, all folded up at the launch pad, ready to be hoisted up to the top of the rocket. As I mentioned, there were they're troubleshooting a couple of issues. And the reason for that is this spacecraft is not going to be in orbit around the Earth. It's going to be in orbit around the sun, about 1.5 million kilometers away from the Earth. So not 400 kilometers up like the Hubble Space Telescope is. There is no possibility of servicing this. There is no way you can go out and fix something or, plug in a wire that shook loose or swap out anything or whatever. So everything has to work. So they're being very, very paranoid about it. Totally legit. The great thing about this is that there's a whole Canadian team involved. Here are some of the Canadian scientists and engineers involved in building a couple of the instruments And I had the chance to speak to Dr. Sarah Gallagher, who is the one of the CSA heads, essentially the science advisor, about the Canadian contribution to the Webb telescope. We're going to be using that content during our launch coverage, but I've got a little preview that I'm going to play for you now. So here's just a little clip of that interview.
Hello, I'm Sarah Gallagher, and I'm the science advisor to the president of the Canadian Space Agency.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the program, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear about Canada's role on the James Webb Space Telescope. What can you tell us?
Oh, I can tell you lots of things. First of all, the Canadian Space Agency and astronomers across the country are so excited for the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. So there's lots of reasons we're excited. So the astronomers are excited because James Webb is just going to be fabulous. It's going to let us do things that we have not been able to do before, see things we haven't been able to see before, and also find things that we have not even expected. And the other reason we're so excited is that the Canadian Space Agency has contributed really significantly to this telescope. We've contributed 2 instruments that are really going to allow fabulous science and actually allow the James Webb Telescope to function.
A little glitch at the sound there. We got about 15 minutes of interview with Dr. Gallagher, and it was fantastic. So tune in for that on our live coverage of the Webb telescope when that launch is set. She talks about the 2 instruments that Canadians built. She talks about some of the Canadians' science projects that will be used on the telescope, and she talks a little bit about her own journey from a little kid who liked science to now being the science advisor at the Canadian Space Agency. So great interview, and really a dynamic speaker. So you want to tune in for that. So the James Webb Space Telescope is mind-bogglingly complicated. It's way too big to put in any rocket, so it has to fold up like origami. And every one of those folds has to unfold properly, automatically, on time. And so after they launch it, it takes about 30 days for them to get everything unfolded and lined up and basically ready to go. So after the launch, we'll have a little bit of a wait before we get the first pictures back. But still, if you look back at what the Hubble Space Telescope has done to science, I mean, how many other scientific instruments have been on the cover of Time magazine or People magazine or whatever? I mean, and some of the pictures that Hubble has taken are magazine covers, album covers, posters. They're as much art as science. So amazing stuff. This is going to blow all of that away. It's like the next level of discovery, and I'm really excited to see not only the solutions to some of these complicated problems that it was built for, but also just what it might accidentally discover. There's going to be a lot of really cool stuff. Chaos has a question here. If I have a telescope, could I get a close-up view of the comet, or is it too far away? Well, if you have a telescope and you point it in the right spot over the next few days, you should get a decent view of it. It is bright enough, but it is getting farther away each night, basically. And so we'll probably lose sight of it after a few more days. It just gets a little bit too close to the horizon, at least for us in sort of southern Canada. If you're in a much more southerly location, you'll have a better view. There is some information on our website. So if you visit the Manitoba Museum's Planetarium website, there's a whole bunch of links there. Let me just pop it on here. So you can always visit us there and go to the planetarium section. There's a section on the current night sky. There's astronomy resources on telescopes and binoculars and all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty useful kind of thing. All right, let's pop back here. And let's see. Okay, just make sure I didn't have... Ulrich is asking, would the sun be down enough so it is safe to look in that direction with binoculars? That's a very good point, Ulrich. As long as the sun is below the horizon, has actually completely set, you're okay. The sky might be bright, but it's not going to be bright enough to actually damage your eyes or things like that. As long as the sun has actually set below the ground and not like if you've got trees there might always be a little spot through the trees where the light could come through. So you have to make sure the sun has actually set. But as long as the sun is completely out of your view below the horizon, you're safe to look around for binoculars. And start at Venus and just sort of go down to the horizon and spot it. Usually you can't see Venus until the sun has gone down anyway. And so if you can see Venus, you're probably okay. Really good point. Oh yeah, Jenny answered the same question. Yasmina is asking, when was the first time the winter solstice was celebrated? Question by Genevieve. Hi, Genevieve. Genevieve, of course, one of the two composers of our theme song of the show, along with Sebastian. So thanks, guys. The solstice has probably been celebrated since the earliest people. I mean, definitely people watched the seasons very carefully as soon as they realized that as soon as they started becoming thinking creatures, I would say. In terms of what kind of celebration, it may be that the very earliest people were too concerned with not freezing to death in the coldest winter to worry about celebrations or that kind of thing. But I think as soon as, you start to get to the point of agriculture, as soon as you start getting cities forming and things like that, where the people have some shelter from the storm, as it were, that's when they start thinking about these sort of bigger ideas of religion and the solstice and the sky and astrology and all those kinds of things. And so I think that's probably, that goes back to what, 8,000 years, something like that. To be honest, I'm not a historian, but certainly, as soon as people were in cities, I bet they were celebrating the solstices, and maybe even before that, to be honest. All right. So, good. Nice to see you. Okay. I really love this consolidated chat so that I can see all the chat things without having to flip between 12 different windows. It really works out well. If you do have other questions, drop them in the chat or drop us an email. You can always hit us up with an email. We have, of course, email and Facebook and so on. And we're always happy to try and answer questions. If we can't do them on the show, we'll drop you an email back and answer your questions or point you in the right direction. Okay, next week is our holiday special, for lack of a better term. We're going to just sort of have some fun. We're going to talk about some winter constellations. We're going to show some pictures. If you've got, something that you did this year that you're proud of that you'd like to send in, Ulrich has been sending us some of the great binocular drawings and stuff like that. Melissa sent us her very first lunar eclipse photo. If you've taken any pictures, done any stuff like that, send it in to us. We'd love to put it on the show next week, because it is kind of a celebration of the audience as well as the show. We're almost 1 year old now. We've been doing this since January 7th. So we're going to celebrate next week. We're going to have a couple of guests on as well that we can chat with. And then the following week, the 30th, we will be doing a look forward at 2022, astronomically speaking. I'm not going to talk about the economy or inflation or COVID or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just going to look forward as to what we can see in the sky. So it is really good to see you all. I hope you have a wonderful week, and hopefully we will see you again next week here on Dome at Home. And I got to just put up